This is a top to what we use on stage, but it's very, very special because if you can see, the numbers all go to 11. Look, right across the board. 11, 11,
and most of
11,
the
and
amps go up to 10.
Exactly.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it? It's not 10. You see, most blokes, be playing at 10. You're on 10 here, all the way up, all the way up, all the way up. You're on 10 on your guitar. Where can you go from there? Where?
I don't know.
Nowhere, exactly. What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly. One louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
Say something.
Mitch McConnell's Shake Madness.
Okay, we're all supposed to do that episode. All right, you ready to go?
Yes.
Let's jump right into it then. And by it, I mean the latest episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Anthony, a man who is feeling ennui from some numbers going up Maddox.
No, not at all. I'm here with completely suspended cynicism to enjoy talking about the latest and greatest Magic the Gathering set.
I appreciate your openness to talking about things you were excited about Modern Horizons 3. I think this set is very cool and has a lot of really sick cards. And I honestly don't feel any of the number go up dread that you do. Like, it's kind of silly.
I love that for you.
It's kind of silly.
Great.
They
That's my
printed
favorite
more
thing about
free
this set.
spells. Like, is free spells Magic needed
I
more
thought that
of?
was
Who
so
knows?
funny. I was reading through the card list and I was like, at least they're showing a little bit of restraint with this set and not printing a bunch more free spells into Modern. And then I hit the cycle of free spells and I was like, oh wait, not only are these more free spells, these are free spells that actually work really, really well with the pitch elementals, which is kind of neat.
Only if they're an instant, though.
Are they not all instants?
Are they all instants? That would be crazy. I don't know. I honestly am not that interested in those. The blue one's a counterspell, which doesn't work well with the pitch elementals.
That's fair.
There are definitely some headline mechanics in the set that I am not that interested in. Devoid, Energy are two mechanics that I don't feel inspired by for the most part, and I don't expect to find a lot of cards that I enjoy in there.
But they're definitely for somebody, and we know exactly who that is.
And that's Dan. But there's also a lot of really cool cards that I think fit the description you have given in the past of good Modern Horizons cards, where they combine things from like disparate sets, like mechanics you otherwise wouldn't find on the same card, get combined in a way that is really satisfying, because this is a set where they can just pull mechanics from anywhere, and therefore we have this rare opportunity to print really cool cards. And I think there's a lot of really cool cards in this set, so I'm just excited to talk about the cards that I think are cool. I have not pulled out cards specifically for my cubes per se, though we certainly will talk about a couple cards I'm excited about for my various cubes. I'm just pulling out cards that I think are interesting and novel and worth talking about.
All right, I've got a couple cards as well.
You said you had one.
One card, yep. Mm-hmm.
Do you also have two?
I have a couple cards that really stand out for the Turbo Cube in particular.
Is the first one Glaring Fleshraker?
No. Yes. Yes, it is.
Okay. Just going in collector number order, that is the first one I came across that I was like, well, that's amazing in the Turbo Cube.
I don't know. I was actually just pulling up the list to see how many actual colorless sources there are. I feel like that might be a little bit more of a commitment to try and make colorless work.
I think it's hard to cast.
It's like a reason to play Soul Ring in the Turbo Cube, which is maybe...
That's kind of cool.
Maybe a positive impact on the environment.
Before we get too deep and talk about actual cards, though, let's just say that this is the first of our set review episodes. We're not doing a mechanics episode per se because...
There's not like a suite of new mechanics here. There are a couple things that have been reworked and an absolute ton of like individual cards that have returning mechanics, but it isn't so much new stuff this set.
So I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of these mechanics as we go through and talk about cards that are interesting to us.
Did we say we're talking about Modern Horizons 3, by the way?
I said the words Modern Horizons 3
Excellent.
earlier. I don't think I explicitly said what we're talking about, but that's what we're talking about. They saw it in the title of the podcast episode when they hit play.
And if you read the titles of the episode before you listen, stop doing that for a couple episodes, because it'll be very funny for you.
Okay. Interesting tease.
Mm-hmm. That's what my tease is.
You're trying to find a way to squeeze a tease in there. Squeeze a tease. I'll also say that, sometimes we do these episodes and we try and basically combine the mechanics episode with our personal cube inclusions. And I'll be honest, I have not gone through the set with a fine-tooth comb and said, like, these are exactly the cards I want to test for my cubes. Again, because currently I'm mostly Ornithopter pilled. I have done that for the 100 Ornithopters cube. There's a couple things that are really interesting here for that cube. But I know that people are interested in what I'm most excited about for the Bun Magic cube. And I'll touch on the things I'm most excited about that are, like, easy reads I saw and knew for sure I was going to jam it in there. But there is a whole bunch of stuff that I'm a solid maybe for on the cube, like the Bun Magic Cube. So this is not even strictly a personal cube inclusions episode, because there's also a lot of cards I just want to talk about that do not necessarily fit in any of my current cubes.
That sounds great.
So that's what we're doing.
And if you, the listener, have cards that you're interested in for your cubes, our set surveys for both Modern Horizons 3 and the associated Commander deck, as we always get with every set, are both live. So share what cards you're interested in giving a try, sort of your first impressions of the set, and also how excited you are about those individual cards. And then, as always, we're going to do a little write-up, do some data analysis, crunch the numbers, and I've really appreciated how these surveys have turned into a great resource. We've been doing them long enough that people have sort of, mentioned in public spaces, I've been stepping away from the game for a bit and coming back and interested in what I might be interested in for my cube, what new stuff has come out. And it's great to be able to point to this suite of articles to give them a little bit of a starting point in digesting these last couple sets. I really appreciate everybody that participates in those.
It also, over time, slowly gives us a really interesting picture in just how the cube design world has been changing, or at least our audience that we reach in the cube design world has been changing. But as of recording, our most popular survey ever was the Modern Horizons 2 survey, so let's beat that one with Modern Horizons 3. The links will be in the show notes, and I feel very confident there are things in this set for every single cube pretty much in existence, with the exception, I guess, being to like cubes that only pull cards from specific sets.
Although even a lot of those, there's a lot of individual cards that take place on particular planes, so
there's things I'm thinking about in this set for the Neoclassical Cube, which is not very common. One last piece of admin before we dive into the episode proper. We are doing a book club. I'm not even sure if it's really a book club. Like, we're going to read a book and then we're going to talk about it once on the show. So
that's what a book club is?
No, I think usually
I'll bring some wine spritzers, so it's officially a book club.
I think usually the other people can participate in it. I mean, if you want to talk about it amongst yourselves, great. And we'll be on Discords, I guess, if you have ideas you want to share with us. But we're reading the book, The Beauty of Games by Frank Lance. We'll put the link in the show notes to where you can purchase it from a reputable vendor. And if you want to have read the book as well when we talk about it in, I don't know, a month, maybe a little over a month from now, whenever we get around to reading and recording that episode, then you can do that. Yeah. I'll also say that you don't have to read it. I think we'll obviously strive for that conversation to be interesting, even if you have not read the book, as I expect the vast majority of our audience will have not.
Yeah, and thank you to Justin Jaffray for recommending that book, and listener to the show, and also friend of the show, Zach Barish, for endorsing that recommendation. Andy and I have not read this book before, so we're looking forward to it and hoping it'll be, I think it'll be interesting both to us and to a lot of our listeners. Yeah,
and I'm excited about this book club format, and I think this is a nice, safe first pick for us. Eventually, I want to maybe read and talk about some books that are further afield from the normal topics of this podcast, but game design is a nice, safe place to start. That's so close to cube design, so close to things we talk about all the time, so I expect it will be lots for us to review on the show. Should we talk about cards?
Let's do it.
Your list, I think, is much shorter than mine. I have 38 cards that I'm interested in at least acknowledging the existence of.
Okay, I have 8. Okay. 9 cards.
I bet maybe your list will include most of mine, so let's do your list first.
Okay, so the one card that stood out for me for specifically my primary cube, regular cube, which is, it kind of plays like a master set, which Modern Horizons sets kind of are like in some ways.
There's only one card that stood out to you?
There really is. I mean, maybe you have a couple other recommendations.
I'm going to be hard pitching you on a number of cards for the regular cube.
So the one that did stand out to me, though, is Mandibular Kite. This is 1 white mana for an artifact equipment. It has living weapon. Equip creature gets +1/+1 and has flying, and it has equip for 3 and a white. So this is essentially just a 1 mana 1/1 flyer, which if it dies, you get to move that equipment around for 4 mana onto other things. And importantly, it does give the equip creature flying. So currently I have a couple similar artifacts in the regular cube, like Barbed Spike, and I think sort of like shifting the cost from Barbed Spike to being a much more expensive equip, but actually granting flying might just be a more interesting design. So I think I'm probably going to throw that in and see how it does.
That one wasn't even on my list of cards for the regular cube.
Incredible.
That one's actually like too regular. I'm like, it's so boring. I have some slightly more exciting cards that jumped at me for the regular cube.
Hit me with a couple.
Well, let's, should we start, I guess we can kind of do it that way. Do you want to do it that way?
I mean, loosely.
Okay, so a quick tour of cards that jumped out at me for the regular cube. One is Expel the Unworthy. This is 1 and a white for a sorcery. It's got kicker for 2 and a white. Choose target creature with mana value 3 or less. If the spell was kicked, instead choose target creature. Exile a chosen creature, then its controller gains life equal to its mana value. Now, obviously, Swords to Plowshares gamers are not interested in this at all because this is just a million times worse than Swords to Plowshares. But this is a great little scaling removal spell, I think, with a nice, clean design. It reminds me a lot of what's the black one with Kicker? I can't remember. We both play.
Blood.
Reminds me a lot of Blood.
No.
You know the one.
Blood Chief's Thirst. Is that it?
Sounds about right.
Okay, great.
This is a lot less efficient than Blood Chief's Thirst, which I think will rule it out pretty handily in cubes like the Bun Magic Cube, but this is the kind of efficiency I think is totally reasonable in a cube like the regular cube. So that one jumped out at me for sure.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. I think that the just 3 mana or less mode will hit almost all of the creatures in the cube, and then by the time somebody, I don't know, does something dumb like tries to play Earl of Squirrel, sure, you'll pay 5 mana to remove that big threat.
Yeah, I imagine you're casting it for the 2 mana mode 90% of the time in that cube, and I think you're very happy to do so. I mean, if you're equal on mana or trading up a little bit on mana, just having hard removal is very good, especially exile removal in that cube where there's a fair bit of recursion and graveyard stuff going on.
The life gain happens regardless of whether or not you do the kicker, is that right?
Yes.
How do you feel about that? Because I know you like Swords to Plowshares probably because it's iconic and ruthlessly efficient, but you also really don't like life gain in general. Is that a drawback to you on this card, or is it like a nice callback?
I feel like it is trying to make some justification for just hard exile removal being in Wight's color pie. It's like, it's not, we're giving you something in exchange. It's a trade.
Fair trade, right?
Yeah, the life gain on Swords to Plowshares in this card does not bother me and does not bother my life gain sensibilities because it is specifically a downside. Like, it's not a card you're proactively putting in your deck because you want to prolong the game. Though it's actually kind of cool that Swords to Plowshares can be used that way, and this one can as well. You can target creatures you control with this, which is not always the case for removal spells they print these days.
True, yeah.
So if you were wanting to just gain some life, though this one's a sorcery, so it's hard to imagine, that comes up with Swords to Plowshares when they're going to remove your thing anyway, and you're like, okay, fine, I'll just turn this into a life gain spell if you think your opponent's not going to have any creatures to target with it. So yeah, the fact that it's not repeatable and that it's like a downside on a spell that is so efficient means the life gain is not a problem for me at all.
Wow, it hits 83% of the creatures in my cube without the kicker, not even counting things that make tokens, so it would be a pretty powerful removal spell here.
I would be excited to play it, and it's definitely not like, I would not be worried about it being too good. It would be like a perfectly serviceable bread and butter removal spell.
All right, what else you got?
Okay, this next card, I actually thought for sure you would have called out because it screams everything you like about Modern Horizons. It is so close to a card that you loved in the regular cube, but were eventually forced to cut because it's too good. This is Indebted Spirit. It's 1 white mana for a 1/1 with Afterlife 1, but it also has Bestow for 2 and a white, and it gives the enchanted creature +1/+1 and Afterlife 1. This is just Lingering Souls for the regular cube. It's Lingering Souls, but not broken.
I don't know. Lingering Souls is more fun somehow. Yeah, I don't hate it.
The combination of Bestow and Afterlife is so cool. The fact that this is like just a reasonable, like you have played in the past in that cube, just like 1-drops that die into other creatures or 2-drops that die into other creatures because they work in certain archetypes. So like the base mode is fine. And then the Bestow mode is like a really cool way to do like a grindy little thing. It works with the sacrifice synergies because you can bestow your thing and then sacrifice it and then sacrifice the thing again. It just feels like a perfect card for this.
Yeah, I mean, the dream to me for the card like this would be you're playing it in like a Bant Ivy deck, but the reality is you're just going to play it in like a black-white sacrifice deck and just grind people out, which is also fun.
But both are possible, and I feel like that's part of the promise of the regular cube.
All right, I'll put it on my list.
That one really jumped out at me as a regular cube kind of card. The next one's just Brainsurge. I kind of love this card. 2 and a blue for an instant. Draw 4 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. It's just like Divination and Brainstorm had a baby. And you are playing Quick Study right now in the regular cube, which I think is fine, but this to me is just so much more fun, a tiny bit more powerful, which I think makes it a little more appealing. You don't have a super abundance of shuffle abilities, so it's not like it's always going to be a million times better than Quick Study, but the promise is there where if you do combine it with Ash Barrens or Prismatic Vista, you get to like really change the contents of your hand.
Okay, that's a pretty reasonable sort of tweak on that card, because yeah, I mean, Quick Study is a card that I like. I like Instant Speed Divination, but it's definitely not super exciting.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this actually more for the Turbo Cube, where I don't think it's quite impactful enough.
It's interesting. I actually hadn't thought about this for the Turbo Cube, but I could see it.
I'm so Turbo Cube brained. I see something that costs 2 and 1 pip, and I'm like, is this for me?
I mean, honestly, I think it'd be quite good there, to be perfectly honest. Like, I think is substantially better than a Divination, and those are already kind of okay in the Turbo Cube. Like,
And there's a lot of like land cycling and
there's so many ways to shuffle that I think it's actually quite good than Turbo Cube the more I think about it.
But do I actually also want to add more of these kinds of effects that take a long time to resolve?
Yes.
Okay, great.
That's what the cube is about. The cube is about taking many game actions.
Okay.
But yeah, that card to me is like, it's so clean, it's exciting. Like the fact they made a 3-mana card draw spell exciting, which frankly I can't get excited by 3-mana card draw spells very often. I think it's so cool. Very into it. Okay, the next card that jumped out at me for the regular cube, or at least maybe it didn't jump out at me for the regular cube, but feels like it's in that same space, is a really cool card, Lethal Throwdown. 1 black mana for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or sacrifice a modified creature. Worded in kind of a strange way, but you got to sacrifice a creature. It can or cannot be modified. And then you get to destroy target creature or planeswalker, so you're doing a Bone Splinters thing. Except, if you sacrifice a modified creature, you get to also draw a card.
Oof. This one just feels like a little word puzzle that kind of... That's what put me off this one.
Too complicated to parse, you think?
I feel that way. It's definitely close.
It's so cool. It's so cool.
You just like drawing cards.
I mean, yeah, yes.
Great.
Of course I like drawing cards.
He admitted.
It's just playing more Magic. It's doing more of the thing that I want my deck to do. This just seems very cool to me. The Bone Splinters on its face is a hard proposition, I think, in a lot of environments. And Bone Shards, I think, is a really nice upgrade for Bone Splinters because you get to also discard a card, which can be a thing that's more easy to make into an upside by drafting and building around it than sacrificing a creature. This is like in the Bone Shard space to me, where it's like you can turn this into like a really good card in the right deck, and it has a nice baseline of like you can just trade a creature for a creature, which you're also trading a card. So like the base rate of I'm sacrificing a creature and spending a spell from my hand to remove your creature, not a great exchange, but there's lots of ways you can break parity on this, and just the idea of like, this is so good with Living Weapon, right?
Or for example, you sacrifice your Mandibular Kite or your Indebted Spirit.
Yeah, really, really good with Living Weapon, especially where the token is a very small part of the value of the card in the first place, and it's inherently a modified creature just all in one card. I think it's really cool and gets your gears turning in the way that you like with some regular cube cards while having a reasonable baseline that is also just fine in a lot of contexts.
Yeah, I mean, should I cut Murder? It's such a good Magic card.
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
I'm going to say no. I don't think you should cut Murder.
But we could cut Drag to the Underworld.
Drag is really good in that cube. So if you wanted to like nerf hard removal a little bit, I think this would be a downgrade power level wise, but I think an upgrade in terms of synergy and like cool stuff your deck can do.
The difficulty of like parsing a set like this for a cube like this is I'm just looking at, there's just so many options of similar cards with little nuanced differences that it's like, it's just difficult to choose.
Yeah. I mean, I think the regular cube has been in a very stable place for a long time, and I think there's very little risk and cost to like making a bunch of exchanges just to see after, like, we know what Dragon of the Underworld plays like.
That's fair.
We and our peers have cast that card dozens and dozens of times in this cube, and so it's a known quantity. This is kind of an unknown quantity. I think some decks could turn this card into a really powerful removal spell that cantrips, and it could be kind of interesting. Neat little common here I also thought of for the regular cube. Retrofitted Transmogrant. A black mana for an artifact creature zombie 1/1, and it has an activated ability, 3 and a black, return Retrofitted Transmogrant from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. You have artifact matter stuff in black. You have +1/+1 counters matter stuff in black, a little bit of it. You have modified matter stuff across the cube in general. You have ways to discard cards. You have sacrifice outlets. This is just like a nice little thing that just greases the wheels of so many decks in the regular cube.
Okay, the fact that it is an artifact
you don't have
and
to defend
a zombie.
all of these. Like, I don't want to keep throwing to you, like, expecting you to, like, defend your decision to not include these.
I'm less enthusiastic here. It just... It doesn't really...
It's a zombie.
Call out to me, but the fact that it is a zombie is appealing. I also didn't realize, like, Transmogrant is a theme, and there's multiple Transmogrants that are all wearing the Transmogrant's crown, and then there's this ancient Mark Tadine artwork on Ashnod's Transmogrant, which is incredible.
This is the kind of thing we really only get in Modern Horizon sets. Like, it is an artifact zombie. Maybe the first one ever? Do you think it's ever happened before? Let's find out.
I think it has.
Okay, well, there's another one in this set. Tidehollow Skull is the iconic
Tidehollow
one.
Sculler.
And then there's 3 more from a couple other places. But a rare type line, which matters a lot in the regular cube.
It's true.
That occurred to me for that reason. Working my way down in collector number order, Mogg Mob. Red, red, red for a 3/3 creature goblin. Sacrifice Mogg Mob. It deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. It's Arc Lightning. It's a goblin.
Arc Lightning. I think that red, red, red is just going to be too tough here. Monocolor decks are not super viable. And I mean, this might be a reason to push in that direction, but...
I'll play
it. Okay.
I'll say I have been noodling on yet another cube project because I can't but help myself. And for this cube project, I am making sure that every single card has correct Oracle text, exactly correct Oracle text. And I did not realize there has never been a correct Oracle text version of Arc Lightning ever printed, which is a huge bummer.
That's not surprising.
I mean, since they changed the Planeswalker damage redirection rule, thus changing the wording of all burn spells that could target creatures or players, they have, I think, made a pretty concerted effort to reprint almost all of the playable, iconic burn spells in Commander sets or Master's product just to get them in somewhere where they have the correct rules text. The two they haven't done it with that really hurt was Arc Lightning and Burst Lightning. There's also no Burst Lightning with the correct rules text, which, big bummer. Molten Gatekeeper. 2 and a red for a 2/3 artifact creature golem. Whenever another creature enters the bet, it's got the Impact Tremors rules text on it, and it's got Unearth for a red.
I think that currently where red is, red feels a little bit overpowered, and I don't necessarily want to add more of these little incidental damage, but let's talk about this in the Turbo Cube section.
It's going to be very good Turbo Cube card. So not as good as the other one we talked about, but we'll get there. That one's harder to cast. Okay, this one isn't actually a regular cube card, but I'm going to talk about it now because it fits this archetype of a perfect, elegant combination of mechanics from past sets that otherwise wouldn't coexist. It's Fanatic of Rhonas. 1 and a green for a 1/4 creature snake druid. It taps to add a green. If you have Ferocious, it taps to add 4 green. Ferocious is if you control creature power 4 or greater.
But how am I ever going to get a 4-powered creature?
It has Eternalize.
Oh no!
Eternalize plus Ferocious. It's a nice, elegant little package. You don't like playing ramp and green in your cubes, so I would not expect you to put this in the regular cube. But
no, I mean, this is also just like a lot of power and flexibility. I think this would stand out.
I don't think it would. It'd be fine.
It won't get a chance to.
I mean, the thing that really is a bummer about this card, which is also part of what makes it powerful, is that 1/4 stat line.
Also true.
That's a
that
huge
would be really
butt.
relevant there, yeah.
Good luck trying to attack through that. Big butt.
You know snakes, they have huge butts.
Big butt.
They kind of do, actually, if you think about it in a different way.
Next card in this category that jumped out to me, which I do have one major complaint about, but otherwise I think it's a very cool card. Kudo, King Among Bears. Green and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature bear. Other creatures have base power and toughness 2/2 and are bears in addition to their other types. This is symmetrical. Your creatures and your opponent's creatures both are all 2/2 bears.
I did not realize this was symmetrical because they don't do that so often anymore.
They've actually done it a fair bit in this set specifically. I think partially there's like a couple reprints, like they have Priest of Titanius in the set, which is counts your opponent's elves, and there's a couple other things I think floating around. But this is a really simple line of rules text that has a lot of compounding, deck building, and sequencing considerations. It is going to make your opponent's creatures that are better than a grizzly bear worse, and it's going to make your creatures that are worse than a grizzly bear better. So fundamentally what it rewards is just going wide. Having lots of little dinky tokens now become bears, which could be quite good.
Is it also kind of just like a modified payoff? Like
it's
if you're
also
playing
a modified payoff,
what is
absolutely.
it called? The Watchdog in the set that's just a 2-mana 3/3, but it's made of 1/1 counters?
Yes, Faithful Watchdog. Yeah, which is also a theme kind of in the regular cube. You have a fair number of +1/+1 counters floating around. Really good with anything that modifies the base stats of a creature because you can take your living weapons or cards like that and turn them into very powerful cards.
Living bears.
I have one major complaint about this card. Can you guess what it is?
It's a bear with horns? The flavor text? That kind of things you care about a lot.
He's king among bears, but he also just trades with every creature on the battlefield now. They should have given him something to make him better than all the other bears.
Should have entered with a 1/1 counter or something.
I feel like the reason they wouldn't do that is because then he wouldn't be a bear.
Yeah, you can't really...
Give him first strike.
But then he wouldn't be a bear.
Bears can have first strike.
I mean, it depends if you're, an aesthetic or a mechanical purist. There's a whole alignment chart.
I think it's pretty well accepted that a bear is a 2/2 for 2. You got hate bears, which are 2/2 for 2s with a bunch of other things tacked on. I don't think it's not a bear if it has first strike. It's not a bear if it's a 2/3.
I will
we can
not
agree on that.
criticize them for committing to the bit.
Well, you should have called him
first among equals.
Just one of the bears.
Just a bear.
Kudo, just a bear. Just like every other bear. I'm also not sure, to be honest, how good this card is.
It'll be really, really impactful on some board states, and it's going to be very variable in the context, whether you want that to happen.
All creatures do keep their abilities, too, which could matter I don't know.
It sure could.
Bear. You're not going to play this card, but this is the time to talk about it. The key art for your cube on Cube Cobra is Knight of the Reliquary, and now we have Wight of the Reliquary, which I am also rolling my eyes out of my head at the incredibly blunt puns and callbacks, but the card I think is actually quite cool. It's a black and a green for a creature zombie knight 2/2 with vigilance. It gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. And it has tap, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So whereas Knight of the Reliquary could turn lands into other lands, or specifically forests and plains into other lands, this can turn creatures into other lands, and it gets buffed by creatures in yard, not by lands in yard. I think it's just a very cool card that if you ignore all of the really on-the-nose callbacks and, shameless nostalgia pandering, it's just a cool card mechanically. And also, I can't tell you how many times I've wished Knight of the Reliquary had vigilance.
Okay, so that's interesting that you say that, because that's actually one of the things that stood out to me about this card is I was like, actually, isn't that kind of a nice tension of Knight of the Reliquary, where you have this first phase where you're using it to buff itself and do land stuff, and then at some point the game shifts and you start attacking with it. I think that's actually a positive tension, and there's just been a huge shift in the way that cards are designed, where every possible downside is always just shaved off in modern card design, and I don't think that's great.
I mean, the land comes into play tapped. That's a downside. Knight of the Reliquary comes into play untapped.
Great point. This card should just say,
I mean, you laugh, but that's a big difference in a certain context, especially constructed.
Yes, that is true. And you know what I like is the lands coming into play untapped, but me having to make choices about whether to attack or do the thing.
I don't know. I think one of the cool things about Knight of the Reliquary, if you can have ways to untap it, which this effectively has built in, is that it is a creature with built-in combat trick potential. You swing as a 2/2, but you can just make it a 3/3 guaranteed at instant speed if you have another creature you're willing to sacrifice. But that's an interesting decision to make right there.
That's true.
I see your point that they just took one of the things that made the card balanced in a way and just took it away. But I think the resulting design is going to be very interesting in terms of how you actually block this thing in combat.
Yeah, the fact that you can do it in combat is not something I had thought about.
Do you block to force them to sacrifice this other creature in order to make it trade with your 3/3 or whatever? I think it's just a very interesting, cool card. I don't know how powerful it is, to be perfectly honest. It's going to depend a lot on context, how many creatures are in your cube, that kind of stuff. But a cool card nonetheless.
And now I'm going to close the tab and never look at it again until I play the Reading Rainbow cube, and then I'll probably draft it.
There's a couple other simple cards here, but I know you're not playing double-face cards in the regular cubes.
They are right out.
But Pinnacle Monk, one of the most elegant double-face cards I've ever read. 3 red for a 2/2 creature, Djinn Monk. It's got prowess, and when it enters the battlefield, you return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. On the backside, it is a land that produces red mana and can come into play untapped if you pay 3 life. They pushed the modal double-face lands in this set pretty substantially, I think.
They really did, yeah.
Which, when Zendikar Rising came out and they introduced modal double-face cards with lands on the back, there were a subset of players that were of the opinion that these cards were broken, just incredibly powerful, gonna change all formats for the rest of time, the flexibility of being able to have a land or a spell on your card is going to be warping to all environments, and especially the mythic rares that could come into play untapped are going to see play in every deck for the rest of history. And this has absolutely just not been borne out. If you look at Constructed Magic, the impact of those cards, the biggest impact by far, as I understand it, has been the Oops All Spells deck, where you can now play a Charbelcher deck with literally no lands in it because these cards are all effectively lands, but not lands in your deck.
Yeah, I was going to say, we need to go back to the Charbelcher episode for all these lands.
Yes, I mean, they had that impact, but the other ones just do not see play as part of a mana base in a regular deck. I mean, honestly, what I see come up most often, the other place I see this come up is Chrome Mox decks in Legacy will play some of their color of this land so that they can also have a spell to exile under Chrome Mox, to imprint under Chrome Mox that is effectively just a mana source. It's upping their Chrome Mox imprintable count without going down on spells that they can cast.
I mean, do people not do the same thing for pitch cards?
I guess I've seen that come up maybe once or twice, where, yeah, you'll play the blue mythic, one of the blue mythic rare. My point is that they did not utterly reshape Constructed, in a way that some people expected at least. So here we see them pushed. They're either monocolored and come into play untapped for the same stipulation that the mythic rare ones in Zendikar Rising could, or they are just fixing lands as well. They're just 2-color lands on the back that come into play tapped and a spell on the front, both of which I think are substantial improvements to these cards on a power level perspective.
Should we also talk about, while we're talking about basic or simple lands, the cycle of fetch lands, the common fetch lands? For example, Deceptive Landscape is a land. It has tap to add colorless. It also has tap and sacrifice Deceptive Landscape. Search your library for a basic plain, swamp, or forest card, put it into play tapped. And it also has cycling for white, black, red. So basically it lets you get one of these 3 colors, or you can cycle it for the same colors. But also it is an untapped colorless land, which I think is just an interesting mix of abilities that is actually kind of powerful.
My favorite fact about these, I'm not sure if you saw this on Twitter, but I believe this was confirmed by Carmen Klump-Herons, that the cycling ability was added almost explicitly just so that the mana symbols for the cards were in the rules text box.
I didn't see that, but that makes a lot of sense. Like, I think that ability just sort of
cool.
It makes the card a lot more obvious, and it also obviously plays in a reasonable way where it's like, okay, I'm using this to get these 3 colors. Once I have them, it has a lot less utility, so I can just get rid of this card and get something that's actually, more impactful.
Yeah, it's a really restrictive cycling cost, so I don't think it makes the cards much more powerful. Like, it's a pretty trivial update to the power level, but the update to how readable the cards are at a glance is such a huge win.
For sure.
And such a cool example of how meta decisions about card design really matter, right? Like, that's a really important thing to make these cards more playable and readable that is beyond just the rules text. Like, it's beyond the mechanics of the card. It's like how you actually perceive what you're reading in the rules text box.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so now I'm down to 26 cards I want to talk about, but let's hear some more from your list before I keep blabbering on.
Should we talk about the Turbo Cube then?
Let's talk about the Turbo Cube.
Okay, so the Turbo Cube, in absolute contrast to my primary cube, is an environment where all spells and activated abilities cost 2 generic mana less to cast. It's a very fast environment where people are doing weird, non-linear, combo-y things and taking lots and lots of game actions really quickly. I want to talk about one card that I'm absolutely not playing first, which is Vexing Bauble.
Yeah, buddy, get this shit right out.
This is 1 mana for an artifact. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. It also has 1 tap and sacrifice Vexing Bauble to draw a card. There are some similar effects like this already in the environment, things like Void Mirror that just sort of lock people out, and they're extremely powerful cards, especially when you're on the play and you can just have it be the last card out of your hand and sort of stop your opponent from doing weird combo-y stuff. But a lot of those other effects, or all those other effects, are symmetrical, so even though they are really good on turn 1, you still have to build around them a little bit, or at least plan and play around them. The fact that this then lets you just draw a card and sacrifice it means it's just so much more powerful than those other effects, because you just cast it as the last card out of your hand, your opponent can't do much on their turn, and then you cash it in for a card and remove the restriction from yourself. I just don't see that being fun.
No, it's definitely not going to be fun. You could argue that Void Mirror isn't even fun right now.
Oh, easily, yeah.
I think it's a very reasonable thing to argue. Like, that's already kind of on the cusp, and this is just so much easier to slot into a deck. Even if it didn't have the static ability, I would play just an artifact that just sacrifices to draw a card in a lot of my decks in that cube.
Oh, definitely, that's true.
Like, it just procs all the artifact cast stuff. It's like, just does what the Turbo Cube does for free.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a card that would sort of make me question if I should take that versus an egg, for example.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably a lot better than an egg in that cube, and not more fun for either player. So we're not playing that one.
So we're not playing that one,
and
but I think it's worth pointing it out. Now, this is going to sound similar, but a card I'm actually excited about is Disruptor Flute. This is 2 mana for an artifact with flash. When it enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Spells with a chosen name cost 3 more to cast, and activated abilities of sources with a chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities.
Take that, Retrofitted Foundry, and we have an answer to you finally.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually really interesting. The fact that it has flash just means that if your opponent, for example, as happened to me a couple weeks ago, just does a combo on turn 1 before you even have a chance to do anything, the fact that I can, when I see my opponent going to cast the Aetherflux Reservoir, have an answer to it
sick.
Is pretty cool. And I think that it's really going to specifically play well against those kind of combo-y decks that are just trying to take advantage of doing broken stuff turn 1, and it's not going to be that great against the fairer decks, which I think is exactly where you want to be.
I had never considered the turn 0 implications of that card, but that is extremely cool. Like,
yeah.
You've talked about trying to make players play more interaction. I think this is extremely main deckable, just, exciting, powerful interaction. And also, you've talked about ways to try and give people more to do on turn 0, right? Like, are there ways they can produce a single mana on, turn 0 so they can have, one counterspell up or something? Like, stuff like that is some things that have been talked about before.
Or
this is a much more elegant way.
Exile your Spirit Guide to have your Croson Grip or something like that. It's a cool line that is difficult to make happen.
Right. This, I think, is a really elegant way to give people more of that without making them jump through some unreasonable hoops.
All right, the other cards that I have here are pretty straightforward, so we can probably go through them pretty quickly. Fanged Flames is 1 and a red for sorcery with Devoid. That's not really relevant here. It deals 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. If that creature or planeswalker would die this turn, exile it instead. So in the Turbo Cube, this is just going to be 1 mana to deal 4 damage to a creature. I think this is going to be slightly easier to understand, maybe slightly better than some of the existing similar effects. These kinds of cards are not super impactful in this environment, as you might imagine, but it is really nice in a lot of decks to have a couple of them, so you can remove, your opponent's really important creature.
Is that one an instant or sorcery?
It is a sorcery, so maybe it's not worth it.
Right out of there. No chance.
Okay.
I mean, no chance I'm playing it, at least.
Let's talk about
personally
2 more red cards. Glimpse the Impossible, 2 and a red, so just a red. For a sorcery, exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. At the beginning of your next end step, if any of those cards remain exiled, put them into your graveyard and create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token for each of those cards put into your graveyard this turn.
Pretty cool Ancestral Recall with upside.
Yes. That is what it is. There are, again, a fair number of similar effects, but I think that they're always desirable, so we can definitely go up on these kinds of cards.
This also seems substantially better than, all the other ones I'm aware of that cost effectively 1 mana in the Turbo Cube are 2 cards, not 3 cards.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
Except for things like the Galvanic Relay, which is a card that I love casting in this cube.
Yes, that one is very different and is many cards. Most of the time. But also not immediately. Many cards for later.
It's maybe worth pointing out that, you're making these scions that can make colorless mana. Colorless mana is actually just not that useful in this environment because your curve is so low. So many cards, like all the ones we're mentioning, only cost colored mana, except for a few things. But again, maybe there's other reasons that having more colorless mana could be useful that is worth exploring. We talked a little bit about Molten Gatekeeper. This is 2 and a red for a 2/3 artifact creature golem. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Molten Gatekeeper deals 1 damage to each opponent. It also has Unearth. There are a number of similar effects like Nettle Drone and Molten Nursery in this cube already. Those specifically care about colorless creatures. This is a little bit more flexible.
Well, Nettle Drone is just a colorless card, period.
Yes.
Which is important, I think, because you're casting many, many colorless spells, but you are not necessarily having that many creatures enter the battlefield in every deck.
Correct. So it's definitely a little bit different, but these kinds of effects are pretty powerful because you can just cast a bunch of free creatures. So I'm excited for this card.
I don't know how good it's actually going to be.
It's not
have you ever considered Impact Tremors in this cube? I wouldn't play Impact Tremors in this cube. This is obviously a lot better because it costs the same amount of mana effectively. It's also a creature. It's also an artifact.
It's also an artifact, which matters a lot.
Yeah.
And the Unearth is not nothing.
That's true.
Next up, I'm curious what you think about this. Warren Soultrader, 2 and a black. You may have noticed a pattern. A lot of the cards I'm interested in cost 2 and a 1 pip because that is where they take the most advantage of the mana discount. This is a creature, zombie, goblin, wizard. You can pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, and create a treasure token. It's also 3/3, which maybe matters sometimes. The fact that this doesn't require tapping, the fact that you can just sacrifice another creature immediately after you've invested 1 black mana into this and just turn all of the creatures you have in play into more mana could be pretty explosive.
Yeah, I think it's probably broken.
I'm not really sure how to evaluate this card.
I think it's probably broken in a way that is cool and interesting, I think. This will definitely go infinite with some things in the cube. I'm not sure what, but I'm confident this is going to go infinite with things.
It's fun to just let players figure that out.
My first thought is some combination of a Mirror Retriever and anything else that gets back an artifact, and you just kind of loop.
And you're also just, because it isn't just directly making a mana, it's making a treasure, so there's a lot of other things that are going to care about those artifacts that are, being cycled through all this nonsense.
I know it will be effectively 2 mana, but have you considered Mayhem Devil in this cube?
Ooh.
I would play it. There are so many things that sacrifice themselves.
Of all the 2 mana cards,
I would be very interested in Mayhem Devil in the Turbo Cube, and this would go absolutely dummy with it. Just so incredibly dummy.
Okay, let's do that. I've missed Mayhem Devil.
I've missed it a little bit too, to be honest. As much as I loathed playing against it in the regular cube because it was a bit of a power level outlier, and I think things like that trigger on you also sacrificing things can be a huge bummer sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
but it's such a clean card. I have missed it a little bit, and I think the Turbo Cube is maybe the home for it.
Okay, let's do that. The next card I'm not so confident in, but I'm curious about thinking about it more. This is Urza's Cave. It's a land type Urza's Cave, which I guess is allowed because Urza's and Cave are both land types. It has tap 4 colorless mana.
I guess you can just do that.
You can just do that in 2024, and that's fine. It also has 3 mana tap, sacrifice it, search your library for a land card, put it into play, tapped, then shuffle. So in the Turbo Cube, this would essentially be a land that you play, pay 1 additional mana, and you can get tapped any other land. You get your Tolarian Academy or your Gaia's Cradle. I think it's probably just too slow, though.
Oh, I think it would be powerful. Here's the thing I don't like about this card.
We have Expedition Map in this environment, which is just the same thing but free, and you can just play the land untapped, right?
It's funny that, yes, in this cube, things costing a land drop is a much higher...
A land drop is a big cost,
because you get so many things happening in one turn that you get very few land drops.
1 to 3, probably.
Yeah, you get very few land drops over the course of the entire game. I think this card would actually be good in the right deck. What I don't like about it is that it would be such a low pick for every deck if it didn't have Tolarian Academy that it's just kind of like a freebie for the Tolarian Academy deck. It would be my feeling.
Yeah, I mean that or a green deck with Gaia's Cradle where you actually also have a lot of ways to play multiple lands. But maybe Crop Rotation would just be better in that case. And
Crop Rotation would almost certainly be better.
Playing a card that doesn't actually take advantage of the discount is kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
All right, we'll think about that one.
It doesn't excite me. I think it would be fine. I can imagine putting it in some decks. It's not like it wouldn't hold up here, but it doesn't. I mean,
to be honest,
inspire.
I think that's a good thing to keep a measure on. All right, last card for the Turbo Cube, and I'm again not really certain about this because of the colorless mana requirement, but I want to sort of take a look through the mana base a little bit more. Is Glaring Fleshraker. This is a creature Eldrazi drone. It is a 2/2. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, which again there are a ton of them in this environment, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature to add colorless, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Glaring Fleshraker deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's similar to the Molten Gatekeeper, but also potentially generates a bunch of little Eldrazi tokens.
Mayhem Devil looking better and better.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a card that I would go out of my way to try and cast. I have not looked at the mana base in detail either. I don't know how castable it actually is, so that would be an open question. But I think this card is really strong here. Maybe one of the premier payoffs, period. In that S tier of cards that are payoffs what your deck is already doing. This is probably maybe the best one, which I'd get really excited about trying to make this card work. And I would jump through hoops to try and cast it.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple things, there's some lands that essentially you just don't expect to be playing as lands, things like Buried Ruin, that's kind of just a way to buy back an artifact, or it's funny, okay, Cave of Temptation does work. There are a couple weird things here and there.
I will say something I don't love about Devoid and Colorless Matters is that there's a lot of cards, probably in the Turbo Cube, that are not correctly errataed to distinguish between generic mana and colorless mana, which means you're relying on people knowing that if anything produced generic mana before... Relying on people knowing you can't produce generic mana. That's just not a thing you can do.
Yeah. Especially cards that say... I was looking at the Cave of Temptation because a lot of these cards will say, add 1 mana of any color, and that also doesn't work.
That cannot be colorless, yeah,
and there's some funny cards
It's a little fiddly.
Modern Horizons that have, 2 abilities to either add colorless or add mana of any color, which is kind of a funny set of effects.
Yeah, so I don't love that aspect of it, but I think the card is quite good. I'd be pretty excited to try and make it work.
All right, should we go back to normal Magic Land?
No, I have one more thing about the Turbo Cube I want to talk about. I didn't go through this whole list with the Turbo Cube in mind, so I don't have any other card suggestions, at least from this set. But I was talking with Barish about this cube, and he had this idea, which immediately I latched onto and was like, that's the perfect idea, and I think he should absolutely...
Perfect idea.
I think you should absolutely do it. Let me just lay out a couple of potential play patterns that I've identified in the Turbo Cube that I think are not the most fun.
Okay.
Lands, I think, are a super low pick.
You think it's not fun that lands are a low pick?
I think lands are a low pick, and that makes a lot of picks less interesting. There are so many cards in the cube that are, just in terms of raw power level, so much better than every single land that it feels like lands are just an afterthought. And it's important in some decks to, for example, get your correct typed duel or something.
Yeah.
But beyond that, the lands do not feel like they are interesting parts of the draft. It feels like the draft is all pretty much about the non-land cards in the Turbo Cube.
It is really fun to plane cycle for irrigated farmland and then cycle it.
No, I know. And that is one of the areas where it's actually kind of interesting. I think your initial response to this is going to be to bristle against it, but I think you should think about it a little more.
I'm prepared to bristle.
The land cycle that started in Odyssey that they recently finished in a Commander product that features Darkwater Catacombs is the example I'll give, where the land's only ability is pay 1 and tap it to add blue and black. These would just be lands that tapped for 2 colors of mana in the Turbo Cube, which you have, for example, not played things like the Signets, because you're like, well, what's the point of playing the Signets? Like, it's not even that interesting. It just, like, you know, whatever, it produces a bunch of mana, but, like, it's not making new and interesting play patterns. It's just, like, doing a dumb, broken thing. These 10 lands would be, I think, quite high picks in the cube. They'd be really powerful, but powerful in a way that, like, I'm still taking eggs over them, I think, almost all the time, pretty much all the time. So they're not going to be, like, power, but to me, they make lands way more interesting in the cube, where it's like, how highly do you take an off-color one of these? I think you kind of don't. Like,
I was actually, first, step 1, bristle.
Okay,
terrible idea, I hate it. Step 2, what if we just added the non-blue ones? Because blue is, like, kind of broken in this cube, so just, like, as a way to balance things a little bit.
I mean, if that's what makes you comfortable with it, go for it, baby. do whatever makes you comfortable. I think it would be just a really interesting way to bring the lands up to the same-ish consideration of the other cards. Whereas right now, again, I feel like the lands are, like, such a far-flung consideration in this cube. I would actually have to think really hard about, like, an off-color egg versus an on-color one of these lands, like Pack 2 or something.
Sure.
Like, at that point, it's like, okay, well, this egg is going to produce effectively colorless mana for me, but it's an egg, so it's mana positive and card positive. It's, like, the best possible thing, card neutral. But these lands, it just feels like the kind of thing that these kind of context shift cubes do best, where it's like, here's a weird cycle of lands that pretty much nobody plays because they're awful. They're, like, just not good in other contexts. But here they would be extremely good, and that would be kind of exciting.
Fair. I'll think about it. I mean, I currently have, 3 cycles of each shock land, which I feel like is too high, but also I feel like whenever we draft this cube, I'm, like, really crossing my fingers, like, I need that dual land, or my deck will not function. But we could definitely shave a cycle of those, and maybe even just cut the fetch lands. I don't know.
I would be totally down for cutting the fetch lands, because they have kind of the inverse effect almost, like, the way in which these cards go from being awful to incredible. The fetch lands go from being incredible to, like, fine. Like, they're good, but, like, they are the opposite of taking advantage of what the Turbo Cube is really good at.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's full credit to Zach Barish for that suggestion, but when he said it, I was like, oh, he's not going to like that. And then I was like, oh, but I really like that all of a sudden when I think about it for more than half a second.
I'll think about it.
We're leaving Turbo Cube land. What other cards interest you from this set for any cube or any application whatsoever?
I mean, the cycle of monocolor lands that enter untapped if you already have a land of that type, and then
like
have
a couple of these.
Another effect. So, for example, Monumental Henge has 4 mana. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card and put it into your hand. Put the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. Sorry, a random order. It's kind of interesting. I'm like not really sure what would excite me to put these in a cube, or like how highly I would be taking them as a player, but I do like lands that do stuff.
I really, really like the red one from this cycle. It's Arena of Glory. It produces red mana, enters tapped unless you control a mountain. But then it has pay a red, tap it, and exert it. Add red. If that mana is spent on a creature spell, it gains haste until end of turn. First of all, I think exert on a land, super cool. And the fact that this can allow you to like do really interesting things with sequencing and potentially give 2 separate creatures haste because it produces 2 mana when you tap it for 1 mana. Like, you're still getting 1 mana out of it. The fact that it has this ability where you pay 1 and get 2 out means that you can then split that mana across 2 creatures and give 2 things haste, which I think is just really cool.
Okay, I misread this at first, where I thought this was just like those lands that you can like sacrifice to get a double mana. You do have to put 1 red mana in this, so
yes.
It's still only netting you 1 red mana. You're not getting a creature a turn ahead plus
Correct.
Getting haste, which would be like a lot. This doesn't really matter to us, but how do you track what red mana spent on what if you want to do that like splitting to cast 2 creatures on Arena or something like that?
I don't know. That's why I don't play on Arena. No idea. I think that one's really cool. This is a great example of like a card that like I have not done the mental labor yet to figure out if this feels like it's going to be of the right power level for the Bun Magic Cube, but I love the play patterns. I'm still vibing on just the like texture of the set, and I think this card is so cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit difficult to evaluate because the cost of putting this in your deck is so low. Like, if you're playing, especially red, you're going to have tons of mountains.
Well, it does depend a lot on the cube, right? Like,
in your cube, let's say.
Yeah, because I have so many typed duels.
You have lots of type duels, and mono red, like, I think red is not a color that's trying to stretch into lots of colors in a lot of cubes. So, like, cost of inclusion is pretty low. The real cost is the draft pick. Like,
yeah,
where are you taking it in the draft?
I also think the green one from this cycle is very cool. If you have Delirium, it has the ability to green, shifting Woodland becomes a copy of target permanent card in your graveyard till end of turn. You can only activate if you have Delirium. Just a very cool take on what is, like, I think on its baseline, like, basically a creature land. You don't tap it to turn it into a permanent, obviously, so you can turn it into a creature and then attack with it. It's kind of like instead of a creature land turning into some base stats, it turns into whatever your deck already has in it, which I think is very cool. But then also the weird edge cases of, like, turn it into some enchantment or, artifact or other non-creature permanent in your graveyard that does something meaningful.
I'm going to turn this into Blood Moon on your turn every turn.
Sure, yeah.
Fun stuff like that. This, I almost wonder, like, should I think about this for regular cube? Maybe something else that I like about these lands is historically there's kind of a weird gap in the power level of lands where there's stuff that's super broken like Gaia's Cradle and Tolarian Academy, and then there's a kind of a big gap for, like, interesting utility lands that really, like, draw you into doing land stuff. And I have Knight of the Reliquary, as you mentioned, it's the cover card for regular cube. Is this something that would actually make that card more exciting to put in your deck and build around?
I don't think that specific interaction would make me a lot more excited to play this card, but I would definitely play this card in the regular cube. I think it'd be fine. It doesn't strike me as a regular cube style card.
It doesn't feel very regular.
But I love to see you grow and change, If you're going to expand your idea of what counts as a regular cube card, then yeah, I'm all about it. Sounds fun. All right, we've gone a little long here, so I'm actually going to skip over some of these that I'm less excited about. I do want to slide in one more that had regular cube vibes to me that I just missed on my first go over, which is Glyph Elemental. It's another bestow creature, 1 and a white for a 2/2 with bestow for 1 and a white, enchantment creature elemental. It's got landfall, put a +1/+1 counter on Glyph Elemental, and then it has another line of text that says if this has +1/+1 counters on it when it's an aura, it also gives a creature +1/+1. Just a nice little elegant, it's got the bestow modality, it's got landfall. It feels like it could play with the +1/+1 counter stuff you got going on in a nice, elegant way.
Yeah, this card actually seems quite powerful. There is a pretty substantial landfall theme through this whole set, and I don't know. I think, honestly, this card maybe just seems a little bit too strong, but I like everything that's happening.
I wouldn't have thought it was too strong, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure.
I mean, you play this on turn 3 and then play a Prismatic Vista next turn, and it's just a 2-mana 4/4.
Yeah.
That's Saddle Rhymestag is the only one that's allowed to be a 2-mana 4/4.
I feel like that happens sometimes. I want to talk about one energy card, just to have a chance to talk about energy, and also to say that this is one energy card that I am considering, even though it is an energy card. Guide of Souls is 1 white mana for a 1/2 creature human cleric. It's a take on the Soul Sister archetype, so whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life and get 1 energy. So this doesn't care about your opponent's creatures, which some of the original Soul Sisters did, but it does also give you an energy. Then it says, whenever you attack, you may pay 3 energy. When you do, put 2 +1/+1 counters and a flying counter on target attacking creature. It becomes an angel in addition to its other types. If this was entirely self-contained, and it is, technically speaking, but if it didn't refer to the energy mechanic, which is implicitly this mechanic designed to, like, connect a bunch of other disparate pieces. If this is just a card that says, like, whenever your third creature enters the battlefield, something gets bigger. Like, that's a very cool card to me. Obviously, I don't like life gain, so I don't see playing this in the Bud Magic Cube personally, but I think it's a very cool combination of abilities. It's like a little kind of dinky 1-drop that gives you a little bit of life here and there.
A dinky 1-drop that completely takes over the game and does insane things.
Well, I like cards that reward you for doing 2 things. Like, this thing will reward you for going wide, but then it does so by going tall. Like, it does so by, like, taking individual creatures and making them more powerful, which I think is a cool textural.
That's not rewarding you for doing 2 things.
No, that's rewarding you for doing the one thing.
It's rewarding you by doing a second thing for doing the first thing.
Well, yeah. I guess what I mean is, like, if your whole deck is built around going wide, this is a weird inclusion because it doesn't go more wider. You would also want to have creatures with, like, good abilities to, like, throw these counters on, or,
for example, Adeline.
Sure, yeah, it's good with that. It's definitely good with that.
Just give her 2 more power, and also
it does trigger on tokens too, which I think a lot of cards like this these days will maybe not trigger on tokens. This one does.
Also give her flying.
Yeah, so kind of a nice little package with Adeline. You just play Adeline, and then
you just
play
attack,
it, and then you make a token, and then
attack,
that's your third energy.
And then she's flying.
You just go.
Yeah, it's interesting. The energy cards seem to sort of fall into a couple categories. One category is these kinds of cards that are kind of a self-contained engine where you could just think this card does its own thing. And yes, if you have multiple different energy engines, the fact that you can choose where you're directing that energy is a lot of flexibility, but you can also just play these kind of cards as one-offs.
Like, that's the thing, is on paper, energy is a sick mechanic for that reason. Like, it's so cool. And what I almost want to say is, like, if
there
Magic
just aren't enough energy cards to get you excited about it yet.
If Magic had gone a different direction and this was like one of the like main mechanics they discovered in like 1996 and we had been getting energy cards this entire time, then it would feel different to me. Even though mechanically it's the same, right? Like mechanically it is just a self-contained engine that you can play in a cube with no other energy and there's no reason it doesn't work.
I mean, the big downside to me, honestly, is like, especially as we're seeing more semi-competitive cube events happening, that you do have to keep tracking that, and if this dies and you don't keep tracking, you say like, oh, that's gone, I'll throw my energy counter back in my dice bag, you're admitting to your opponent you have no way to get that out of your graveyard. So like there is, to play optimally, you have to keep tracking that for the rest of the game, and I wonder how often that's going to be a point of frustration.
Yeah, I don't know. I still think the vast majority of cubing is not competitive, so I don't think that's actually going to be a real problem. It's just, it feels like it adds so much cognitive weight when it doesn't actually. Like, this card does have all of the rules text on it. It just feels like a new player sitting down that maybe didn't draft during Kaladesh or whatever would look at this and be like, what is this foreign symbol that I don't recognize? And it just feels like it's got more complexity behind it.
Reminder text right there.
I know, it says right there. It's the thing. It's like, theoretically it's fine, but it just feels wrong to me, and I can't really tell you why exactly.
There's another big category of energy cards, which are basically just sort of like redone cards that have been reworked to work with the energy mechanics. So, for example, there's like a lightning bolt and a miscalculation and even a wheel of fortune that just say, hey, you get some energy and then you can use that energy as part of the resolution of this effect. So, for example, with the lightning bolt, you just pay some amount of energy, which means you just get extra energy for the excess damage you don't need to do.
Which is very cool.
I think that those kind of like staple cards actually start to make it a little bit more interesting, where it's like, okay, I would normally play lightning bolt. Instead, I'm just going to play this, and now it has an opportunity to interact with these other more engine-y cards. But they're only really useful if you're putting in a bunch of them specifically for that reason. Otherwise, there's no reason really to play that over Lightning Bolt.
Like the role that Attune with Ether played in that limited set and constructed almost to a toxic degree was very cool, I thought. Like, Attune with Ether was a really cool card for that block when Kaladesh was designed. But that kind of card doesn't work unless you're really committed to the bit. And I guess part of me, because energy is kind of a really elegant mechanic, wishes that the bit extended through way more of Magic, because I guess it'd be really hard to balance, which is the trade-off. But, you know.
There's also just a cantrip that's just draw a card, get 2 energy, which seems, I mean, you mentioned Attune with Aether, seems better than Attune with Aether in a lot of contexts.
Yeah, I mean,
Modern Horizons, that was banned in Standard because the energy deck was ridiculous, so maybe it's just not a concern in Modern, but card seems kind of crazy.
I don't see that being a thing in Modern, but, you know, famous last words. I don't know the Modern metagame well enough to know if any of these energy cards are going to do anything. We'll find out, I guess.
There's a lot of them, so.
We're focusing on talking about the cards we're excited about. I do want to... There's one card here that just hits a little wrong, but otherwise is interesting. Phelia Exuberant Shepherd. 1 and a white.
But you love dogs.
Well, just 1 and a white. For legendary creature dog, it's a 2/2. It's got flash. When Phelia Exuberant Shepherd attacks, exile up to 1 other target non-land permanent at the beginning of the next end step. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Phelia. Okay, some things about this card I really like. I think that Flicker Wisp style effects are really cool, and this is very close to Flicker Wisp. The one difference here is that it can't target lands, which is probably good in most cases, though I do like those edge cases. Having flash makes this a lot better, but the fact that you can either, you know, remove your opponent's stuff every turn and just keep your 2/2 and, you know, keep blanking their blocker or whatever, or you can choose to, like, if you can get in with this and, you know, it doesn't trade in combat, you can grow it by exiling your own things, retriggering your own end of the battlefield abilities. Like, that's all very cool. This Corgi art really is not doing it for me at all.
Really?
Is a Corgi even a shepherd? It's not a shepherd, right?
No.
So it's Exuberant Shepherd, and they just drew a Corgi on it. And, you know, maybe this is Rudy Saswanto's Corgi or something, and they took their opportunity to get it into the game. I don't know what the story is behind this Corgi, but it has, like, Universes Beyond vibes, because it seems so out of the like high fantasy. And, you know, I mean, there's so many things in the set that are not high fantasy, like Eldrazi and stuff. All of it seems to work for me, except for this stupid corgi. It's just, I don't know, man. Also, I think, you know, in a true soul herder kind of way, cards like this do have a high potential to be very frustrating if the best thing to do is just repetitively do one thing over and over again.
Especially when it comes to the flash. So it's like, okay, I'm prepared to block whatever you've got next turn, and then it's like, oh, end of turn, you cast this ridiculous corgi and then blink my thing. And yeah, I could see that being frustrating.
And like, in a similar way that like Soul Herder at least has some tension to it, which is to say it's very easy to kill and you have to get to your end step before it does anything the first time. And it's really only good if you get to do it a bunch of times. That's when Soul Herder becomes an actual problem. This has flash, and so it just kind of, in the same way that you were suggesting that the vigilance on Wight of the Reliquary like takes away some of the fun, the flash is like, all right, well, you just, no risk, don't worry, it'll all be fine.
No risk except for the risk that your opponent has a corgi at your end step.
Yeah, I don't see myself playing this card just for those vibes reasons alone, but mechanically it's whatever, it's fine. I do have to mention just at least one card here for the Degenerate Micro Cube. This is my cube in which you draft 15 card decks.
I would not be surprised if this set had more than one card for
There's quite a few for it, and I've been on the cusp of adding an Eldrazi theme for a while, which I think I'm going to give a test proper with this set for obvious reasons. But one card that really jumped out at me for that cube is Consign to Memory. 1 blue mana for an instant with Replicate for a generic mana, counter target triggered ability or colorless spell. The ability to counter any number of triggered ability or colorless spells on the stack with enough mana is very compelling, and both these modes are contextually sometimes very good against certain decks, and the ability to like have both at your disposal on one card I think is quite powerful. And Replicate is a particularly good mechanic in degenerate environments because it gets around counter spells, because it actually puts new copies of the spell on the stack. So
oh yeah, doesn't get around Flusterstorm.
It doesn't get, well, no, it can. Because that doesn't count as casting. It doesn't up the storm count when you replicate it.
Right, well, I guess it depends what the storm count is.
Depends what the storm count is, but it has a much better chance of getting around Flusterstorm than anything else. So just a quietly powerful little answer, I think, for a cube like that. There's so many cards in this set I really like, but this next one might be my favorite, just in terms of the overall package. Shadow of the Second Sun. 4 blue for an enchantment aura. Enchant player. At the beginning of enchanted player's post-combat main phase, there is an additional beginning phase after this phase.
This is a weird card. I was actually just listening to the GLHF mechanics episode, breaking down a bunch of the cards here.
Judge Rob.
I didn't realize, thank you, Judge Rob, for clarifying that this triggers at the very end of your turn, which means you're not going to be able to just like cast a bunch more creatures after you untap all your lands with this.
Yeah, so this is after your main phases are all over, you get a beginning phase. The beginning phase is your untap, upkeep, and draw steps. So assuming you have nothing that takes advantage of upkeep triggers, you basically get to untap all your stuff at the end of your turn and draw a card, which I think just makes this a very, very cool card for control decks because it allows you to like tap out on your turn to play your big value engine, and then you get to untap and still hold up all your counter magic. It reminds me...
draws you the card right back.
Right. It reminds me a little bit of Primordial Mist in that way. I mean, it doesn't untap you, obviously, but the fact that it, like, starts generating card advantage immediately, and, like, the way that in which it, like, gains value over time is just a perfect control card. And then the additional, like, spice here of putting this in a deck that has beneficial things that trigger on your own upkeep, and then just getting more of that is, like, such a cool little build-around. It's one you got to read twice, because you think people's first read of it, you assume that you just get to untap and like do all your stuff again. But I think it's really cool that you get to have this elegant little like baseline of just drawing an extra card every turn, getting to use your mana on both turns, which, is it worth 6 mana? In most contexts, probably not. But the possibility of combining this with upkeep stuff is what really has me excited about it.
And then your opponent plays Sulfuric Vortex, and you're destroyed.
Also kind of cool, to be honest. Really into that card. That's actually one of the cards I'm considering for the Neoclassical Cube. I think it could be very cool there, potentially.
It just speeds up all like the suspend cards. Is that cool?
Yeah, it is cool. I don't have any of those in the Neoclassical Cube, but in a different context, it speeds up suspend cards. That's very cool. It's cool.
Neat.
The card I'm most windmill slamming into the Bun Magic Cube from this set is Nethergoyf. 1 black mana for a creature, Lurgoyf. Its power is star, and its toughness is 1+ star, as you might expect.
Sounds familiar.
It only counts your own graveyard, not both graveyards, importantly, which is only a little annoying. Like, it's a little bit worse. That I'm not as stressed about. It's a little annoying because I do have regular Tarmogoyf in the cube, and now the idea that you have to keep track of 2 different Tarmogoyf numbers possibly in your deck is a little bit annoying.
That's why you got the dice.
But it's 1 mana, and it also has Escape for 2 and a black and exiling any number of other cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. Just a sick little card. I mean, any 1 mana card that has the potential to be like a big beefy boy is the kind of thing I'm really excited about in the Bun Magic cube. This one especially rewards you for playing instants and sorceries and things that are going to the graveyard automatically, because you can't always trust your creatures are going to end up there naturally. And then the escape on it being this like thing that directly references the thing that it's getting its power and toughness from. Like you can escape it, but it's going to make it smaller in the process. Just such a cool card. A slam dunk on every level for me. Love it.
I didn't realize the escape keyword is not really in the original. What set was that? That was TBD.
Yeah, Theros Beyond Death.
Theros Beyond Death. It was always linked to exiling a certain number of cards from your graveyard, but that was always just the cost there, and they can make that cost whatever they want. It's just an ability that allows you to recast things from your graveyard. So this does not have an explicit number of cards you need to exile. It's any number of cards that, again, meet that requirement of at least 4 other card types.
Right, like it could just be Tarfire and Ginger Brute.
Yeah.
And you're just done. That's it. Just 2 cards, and you get your Nethergoyf back. As long as you get the 4
But now he's
types.
smaller, probably.
But now he's probably smaller. You probably didn't have another tribal or kindred, I guess, card in your graveyard when you did the Tarfire. Detective's Phoenix. 2 and a red for an enchantment creature Phoenix. It's a 2/2. It has Bestow for a red and Collect Evidence 6. Getting a little complicated already, but you can bestow it by just paying a red and exiling cards with total mana value 6 or greater from your graveyard. It's got flying and haste, as many Phoenixes do. The enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and haste. And you can cast Detective's Phoenix from your graveyard using its bestow ability. A lot going on here.
There's so much going on here.
So much going on here. The baseline, 3 mana, 2/2 flying haste. Fine. You can also, then, after it just dies normally, because you played your 2/2 flying haste and got into combat, you get to the late game, and you have enough cards in your graveyard to collect Evidence 6. You can then just bring this back as a aura, which gives something else flying and haste, which is a really powerful thing to be able to do for 1 red mana, because you can imagine in the mid or late game, you spend 4 mana on your 4-drop, have 1 mana left over and a bunch of cards in your graveyard. Now that 4-drop is 2 power and toughness bigger and also has flying and haste, which is a huge difference. I think the card is very, very cool. It's also maybe got a little too much going on to be parsable for most people. Bestow plus collect evidence, plus the fact that you can do it from the graveyard. It's just a lot. There's a lot here.
Yeah, like especially the collect evidence. I think that made it in its context where there are multiple collect evidence cards easier to understand. But when
certainly
it's a single one-off
certainly the
card
keyword collect evidence here is
it's just like what?
Bad.
Wait, what? I guess it links it to the detectiveness of it, but
well, I think it's obviously it was the other way around, and I don't like that it's called Detective's Phoenix either.
I was expecting to find a clue somewhere in here.
Yeah, the flavor of it I don't love, and the fact that it actually has the words collect evidence on it feels wrong. But mechanically, the way this game piece interacts with the other game pieces, I think, is very compelling and potentially powerful. So I got my eyes on that one. Here's what I almost thought you might try for the regular cube, and then I honestly might try for the Bun Magic cube, even though it is not the most powerful. Reckless Pyro Surfer, 1 and a red for a 2/2 with haste. Landfall, it gets Battle Cry until end of turn. And it has reminder text that specifies that Battle Cries do in fact stack and trigger separately. So you play this and then play a fetch land, you get 2 instances of Battle Cry, and now you're attacking for +2/+0 to all of your attacking creatures that same turn. Clean, elegant little card that I think has a high ceiling.
I don't hate the card. I think for me, with the regular cube, it's more about the context and just where the cube is right now that I don't want to necessarily be pushing the kind of stuff that this would encourage currently.
I've been a little bit critical of some of the ham-fisted nostalgic callbacks in this set, so I want to call out one that I think is really successful, and I'd love to see more of this kind of thing in the future. Skoa Embermage is 4 red for a 4/4 legendary creature goblin wizard. It's a legend at common, too, which I thought was interesting. We don't see that very often,
well, but it has grandeur, so you want to be able to draft a bunch of them.
Right. It has, when it enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to any target, so on its base rate, it's a 6 mana...
Kavu?
Yeah, 6 mana Kavu with a little better stat line, which is totally fine for a common. I mean, that as a common in a regular set would probably be warping, but in Modern Horizons it'll probably be okay. It also has Grandeur. Discard another card named Skoa Embermage and sacrifice 2 mountains. It deals 4 damage to any target. The callback here to Fire Blast is so sick, and it's sick because they didn't call it Skoa Fire Blaster or whatever. Like, they didn't give it some stupid ham-fisted name. It's actually a thing that you get to recognize as a player, and like, the whole point of these callbacks is that you're supposed to feel like a little smart, and when they just absolutely smack you over the head with it, it just feels so blunt. So good job on that one. More of that. More of that, less of Wight of the Reliquary, please.
Oh, so this is less of a compliment sandwich and more of a compliment fruit salad.
We're going long, but I gotta talk about a couple more cards here. Birthing Ritual, 1 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature, look at the top 7 cards of your library. Then you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, you may put a creature card with mana value X or less from among those cards onto the battlefield, where X is 1 plus a sacrificed creature's mana value. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now that you've given me this lens, I can see how this is like, oh, what if Birthing Pod was 0 risk? And
yeah,
it is kind of that. You do get to look at the top cards of your library first and decide if you even want to sacrifice a creature to do anything about it. It does say X or less instead of exactly X. You can also just get cheaper things. But I think this is potentially a very cool payoff for building a like creature-heavy deck, especially a creature-heavy deck in the Bun Magic Cube that goes all the way up the curve, which, it should be said, there's not a lot of other motivations to play 4 and 5 drops necessarily in that cube. You can build great decks that just have, 1, 2, and 3 drop creatures, or even just 1 and 2 drop creatures in some cases. And to make Green's identity in that cube more about like, yeah, you actually want to play your 3, 4, and 5 drops and a little bit of each. Like, you're consciously looking for a 4 drop or 2, so you actually have something to hit when you want to sacrifice a 3 drop.
I mean, but like you said, this also doesn't force you to actually have a pod curve. You can just keep getting cheap creatures with ETBs,
but it's not
right?
good if you're not doing that, I don't think.
Probably not.
Spending a whole card and just turning your 2 drops into other 2 drops is probably not worth it. I also think it's really cool, not for the Bun Magic Cube, but for other cubes. 7 cards is really deep and limited. You're looking at a huge portion of your deck. This is a really, really cool combo enabler for me, I think, that doesn't have to be all in. You can also just do this for value, but the fact that if you do have some creature-based combo card in your deck, this is going to get you to it pretty fast, at least in a reasonable time frame. I think it makes it very cool that it can support a combo strategy without being Worldly Tutor, which is just kind of bad outside of that context.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it.
I also think 6 is really cool. 2 and a green for a legendary creature, Tree Folk. It's got reach, it's a 2/4. When 6 attacks, mill 3 cards, you may put a land card from among them into your hand. As long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace. This would actually be completely sick in the Turbo Cube.
Oof, there's so many words on this thing. Let me try one more time to finish it.
Okay, here's what it does. It gives the egg in your graveyard now has retrace. Every single land you draw is just another egg.
Do we need more?
It's so cool.
Do we need more of that?
It's really cool. I think you got to at least try it. I don't think it'd be broken. Famous last words.
It seems about as broken as what's the red Yawgmoth Swill?
Underworld Breach.
Underworld Breach, which is very broken. Actually, probably better.
This really has the more I'm looking at it, like a fairly common thing of a Turbo Cube is having too many lands in your hand, because you need to have enough lands to hit your first and second land drops, which is 10 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also draw most of your deck in the first couple turns of the game, and then you have 4 lands in your hand, and you're not going to make it 4 more turns. So giving something else to do with those lands, I think, is really cool. And the fact there are so many free spells in that cube, I literally only thought about it when I read it just now. I'm excited about it for the Bun Magic Cube, maybe, just because I think it's really cool. But this is a Turbo Cube champ. It's going to be so sick.
Oof.
It also might be a big problem.
It might be a big problem.
The fact that you get free spells that are going to draw cards, which are likely to draw you into more lands or more free spells, means that this might just be if you drafted your deck right and this resolves, you just win. But I want to see that happen a couple times, and that's part of the fun of a cube like the Turbo Cube, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it is like Green's Chrome Host Seed Shark, I guess. Although it's also
way
really,
better than Chrome
really
Host
good
Sea Shark.
with the Chrome Host Sea Shark.
The thing is, it doesn't actually, it in and of itself is not a win condition. This is an enabler. It's a 2/4 with reach. It's not going to kill your opponent, and it's not going to make any game pieces that are going to kill your opponent, but it will allow you to draw a huge portion of your deck and make a bunch of mana, and then you can do whatever you want with that.
Whatever you want. That's
whatever
the dream
you want.
of the Turbo Cube.
We got the Red-White Titan, which, if you had asked me which Titan I wanted, Red-White probably would have been the last on my list of ones that I wanted. But here we go. We've got it anyway. It's a Titan in all the ways. It costs 3 mana. It's a 6/6. It has escape for 4 mana.
This is the Theros Titan, not the Grave Titan.
This is the Uro Croxa style Titan, not the Grave Titan style Titan. And its ability is Lightning Helix. So Lightning Helix when it enters the battlefield, Lightning Helix when it attacks.
Lightning Helix in the morning, Lightning Helix in the afternoon.
I've been a big champion of the Uros and Croxas in cubes like the Bun Magic Cube. I really enjoy their play patterns. I like that it gives you a like big game-ending threat that you spend a bunch of other resources on. You're not spending a bunch of mana on it per se. You're spending a bunch of other stuff. All these cards in your graveyard. You're like, committing a big part of your deck to making that card work. My least favorite thing of both of those cards, by far, is the life gain on Uro. I would love for it to do anything but gain life. Scry 1, do nothing else even. I think I would like the card more. And the fact that this also has a bunch of life gain strapped to it, and also is in the colors that I am least excited about. I'll probably try this, because I want to cast it a couple times to see how it feels, but I don't think I'm going to like this one anywhere near as much as I like Uro and Croxa, personally. Hey friends, couple more thoughts from the editing booth on Flage, Titan of Fire's Fury. I think one of the notable things about this card is the relative rate of the front end. I think when Uro was first spoiled, before people realized it was kind of broken, a lot of the responses were, why would I pay 3 mana for a sorcery speed Explore? Explore is not even a particularly good card. Doing for 3 mana at sorcery speed does not seem great, and there was a lot of discussion originally of it being like a cost you had to pay, like you don't want to cast the first unescaped Uro, but you have to get it in your graveyard so you can actually cast the version that matters. Croxa similarly, make your opponent discard a card of their choice, plus a little chip damage. Not an effect you'd normally want to pay a card and 2 mana for. Meanwhile, Flage is just a 3 mana Lightning Helix. I mean, sorcery speed, but a 3 mana Lightning Helix, I think, is way better on the front end than the other 2 Titans we have already got. Which means I think his card is going to be quite good. The card advantage of his games is a little less direct. I mean, Uro just literally draws you cards. Croxa literally takes cards from your opponent. This one can probably kill things. You'll probably have stuff on board you can kill with 3 damage most of the time. So in that sense, it's also going to be gaining card advantage with each trigger. The card seems very strong. I'm still not over the moon about having this in red-white, and repeatable life gain is something I never love, but still going to have to give this a try, I think. Oh, and since I'm already here, I wasn't going to actually edit in something about this, but because I'm already here talking about Flage, I'm just also going to say that I cannot stop thinking about 6 in the Turbo Cube, and the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced it is pretty broken, but I really want to ride that dragon. It's just funny listening to myself say, it's good, but probably not broken, famous last words, which I said yesterday at time of editing, and after just 24 hours of thinking on it, I'm like, yeah, my opinion has changed on that quite a bit. I still really want to play it, but could be a problem. All right, little speed run here. Psychic Frog is cool. I'm not going to read the rules text. It's kind of like if you combine Lotleth Troll and Psychotog. Probably not going to find a space in any of my cubes, and it's definitely on that spectrum of a little bit on the nose in terms of its reference, but whatever. Fell the Profane might be the removal spell with a land on the back that actually works. I played the Malakir whatever one, the one from Zendikar Rising, which was basically identical, except it came into play tapped on the back instead of not.
Wow, they've printed a lot of DFCs. That makes it harder to filter. Hagra Mauling is what you're thinking of. 1 less to cast if opponent controls no basic lands, destroy target creature. It costs 4 mana. It does enter the battlefield tapped as a land.
Is it a sorcery, though?
It is an instant.
It's an instant, okay. It has that weird text about being cheaper if your opponent controls non-basic lands, which I just don't like as a distraction. Fellow Profane is just clean. It's 2 black for an instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker, and an untapped black land on the back if you want to pay 3 life, or comes into play tapped. Maybe clean enough and flexible enough to actually work in the Bun Magic Cube. Similarly, Waterlogged Teachings is the blue-black hybrid DFC from Modern Horizons 3. It's 3 and a blue or black, 4 mana total. For an instant, search your library for an instant or a card with flash, reveal it, and put into your hand, then shuffle. And it has a enter the battlefield tapped blue-black land on the back. I think this card's quite powerful. 4 mana cost seems really high, and it is, but the fact that it's an instant means that you can still play this at almost no risk, because you just, if you need a land, it's a land, it's fine, it's a tap land, you're paying the opportunity cost of it being a tap land, but then the ability to just go get, another counterspell if you need another counterspell, or at the point of the game that you can cast this, maybe you go and get something more impressive, like a Cryptic Command or something that actually, or a Mystic Confluence.
Get something to impress
bigger
me.
Counterspells. I'm not even thinking about this in cubes where you have combo cards you're trying to go fetch, which just seems really strong. Kind of into that one. I'm not gonna. We've been going long. I'm not gonna read all these other little cards here. Those are the ones I'm most excited about. We hit the highlights for me, which are for sure Shadow of the Second Sun, Nethergoyf, Reckless Pyro Surfer, Birthing Ritual, 6. These are the cards that I'm most inspired by looking at this list.
Retrace is kind of a cool mechanic.
It's so cool. It's also maybe too good, but it's really cool.
Maybe I just want to put like Raven's Crime into more cubes. Maybe that's the era I'm entering.
I love Raven's Crime. All right, that's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. As we said, you should go to our website and fill out the Modern Horizons 3 survey and the corresponding Commander set survey. They're going to be linked in the show notes. They're also going to be at a banner on the top of the page, so you can just go to luckypaper.co and click that banner. That'll be up for a couple weeks, and then we will be reviewing the responses to that survey in the aggregate on the podcast. Also, buy yourself a copy of The Beauty of Games. Read it if you want, and then we'll be talking about it in a few weeks. And also, stop reading the titles of the podcast, but keep listening, as Anthony says, so that you can be surprised at some point in the future.
Especially you, Brett. Especially you.
Brett, you know what you did. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This podcast is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and then speaking into microphones about it. Let's go finish stuffing tubes, Maddox.
Yeah, let's do it. Pack and play mats is what you mean, right?
Yeah, I guess I'll say that too. If you ordered a playmat, I hope by the time this episode is in your feed, I have a scheduled pickup dates with all of the delivery providers, and they will be going out this week. Fingers crossed.
And then you get your living room back, which
then I can have my house back. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff, which I'm very lucky to have people order a lot of playmats. Not looking at gift horse for them.